G'day, my name's Alan and I'm producing this tape to provide a bit of information about the experience of having an ankle fusion. This ankle fusion is needed because of growing arthritis generally as a result of an earlier trauma. In my case it was a serious parachuting accident about almost exactly 30 years ago. I did check with the specialist to see whether it was possible to debride or clean up the area and possibly give me an extra 10,000 kilometres or so, but no, the answer was it needed an ankle fusion. Now this tape is, unfortunately, it's my first time at producing something like this and putting it up, but I feel it's probably valuable for people who may be even contemplating an ankle fusion or about to have it. It'll give them some information. There was one done about 3 years ago by an American, but I just thought it was worth updating. Unfortunately, being new and a bit of a dinosaur, not really knowing how to do it all, most of what is going to follow in the segments will be fairly dark, and that's because I didn't set the lighting up properly. But it took me too long to redo the whole thing, so you don't need to be looking at my mug and can just listen to this over time and see what you think and whether it's of any help to you. This particular one will go up to about just over the 6-week mark, and then at a later stage I'll produce a second tape to report on what occurs after that. So anyway, I hope for some people, not a lot of people, it's not a big audience because there aren't a lot of people having or contemplating an ankle fusion, and generally it's older people like myself, but I hope someone finds it of value. Let's just consider exactly what is involved in an ankle fusion, or the technical name is Arthrodesis that you may have seen. It's basically taking or grinding off, debriding the bottom of the two main bones coming down the leg, which is the tibia and the fibula bone, and the main bone on top of the ankle, the talus bone, and bringing those three bones together. They often employ bone grafting, which can be taken from the patient, or there is a synthetic type of material that can be used for the purpose. It's not a glue, but it is inserted into the three-way joint. Then of course you employ screws. In my case it was 4. Sometimes they also involve plates, and then they lock the whole of the joint together at a 90-degree angle. Like all major operations, it's very important to consider who you choose to do this for you. I've certainly found that to be important. I had 2 opinions on it. Both of them said that I definitely needed a fusion, that it was not possible to trim it up and give me another 10,000 K or so. And I selected or chose the orthopaedic surgeon who I'd had an experience with about 20 years ago doing an arthroscope on my knee. I also knew of him in the medical community, and I was very happy with the choice that I made. Before your operation, it's very important to sort out things that need to be done and that you're not going to be able to do after the operation. And in our case we live out on a 20-acre property, so things like pumping up water and other manual jobs around the place like that, we found to be, or I found to be important to get some of those things in order, because you'll be surprised what it is that you can't do after these operations. The next thing that you need to think about is the everyday tasks that are going to occur after your operation and how you are going to exercise these, particularly bathroom, showering and all of those sort of general ablution situations that you have on a daily basis, preparing meals and so on. It's very helpful, of course. I'm married, have a wonderful wife, and she couldn't have been more brilliant in the process for me, so I was very fortunate. And what we did was prepare a routine. You'll see later, I'll show you some of the implements and things that I needed, such as a sleeve to cover the cast leg, and seats in the bathroom, sometimes the toilet. I was okay with that, could get up and down okay. And also one was a very, in our case where we have a shower bath, I needed a panel seat that fitted very well over the bath, and I found a beauty for that purpose. So there is a lot to be considered, and how you are going to manage everything over a fairly prolonged period when you're largely indisposed. And so to the operation itself, most of us probably have experienced a visit to a hospital for some sort of a procedure, and so you know that you're checked in. There's a lot of preparation being done before you make it to the theatre. In my case, I think I was one of the later, if not the last ones on the list, so I was done later afternoon. And you will meet the anaesthetist, of course, who runs through the aspects of that very important part of things. And then you're wheeled into the operating theatre, and things move fairly quickly then. They've already got a bung in your arm, and the anaesthetist says, well, we'll start things off, and probably in less than 30 seconds you're in La La Land. After the operation, you're taken into the recovery rooms, and while the effects of the anaesthetic wears off, I was very pleased that my wife was one of the first faces that I saw waking up, and she tells me that I was a little bit starey and all that as the effects were lessening, but generally I felt pretty good, and was soon after taken up onto the wards. Back on the ward, I found that over about the next 12 hours there were two situations that I confronted. The first of them was that I was quite nauseous and vomited violently about 4 times. Basically, I felt from the bottom of my boots because things were mostly black. And the other one for me was that I had a bit of urinary retention with the bladder. And both of these issues came good. I got some special attention with something for the bladder retention, and that came good, as did the violent vomiting stop within the next 12 hours. And I stayed for 2 nights and then was released on the 3rd day, which happened to be the day before my 70th birthday. I think it's true to say that we probably are all pretty happy when we get home, and of course it was to start the next part of what really, as you will see, turns out to be a fairly long journey. During the operation, or when the operation is finished, you're put into what they call a half cast, and this remains in place for about 2 weeks, after which time on your next visit to see the surgeon, it's removed and he checks the wounds and removes, the stitches. From there, it's generally the situation that you go back into a full cast. However, I had a little bit of a bleed on one of the wounds, and to ensure that we could check this and mitigate against infection and so on, and we had a discussion, and it was agreed that I could go into a moon boot on the very, very strong proviso that I treated it as a cast. And that meant I had to commit to keeping it on at all times, also in bed, and that there was to be absolutely no weight bearing, and as I said, pretty much like a cast. There was the occasion that you could release it if you were, say, on the bed to maybe wash or put a bit of cream or something on the leg, and just get a bit of general relief that way, but certainly not whilst you were vertical or moving around. Now, a very big thing with all of these sorts of operations, broken ankles, fusions, anything like that, is the pain that is generally experienced after such trauma, and you will have something put in during the operation, and then sedatives are given to help with the pain immediate post-operative, and for that period certainly of days, if not a week or more after. I have to say that one of the things that I was most gratified with was the fact that even in hospital and after I came home, I had little, if any, pain whatsoever. And whilst I was given some fairly strong medication to take home in the event that I did get some serious pain, I think over the first week, on maybe 3 nights, I took 2 Panadol, and generally, that wasn't to do with pain, but largely just because I couldn't get off to sleep. I don't know why. I like to think it's because of the way the surgery was performed. As I said, I had a brilliant surgeon, but touch wood, I haven't up to this point had any serious pain, and although I believe that's the exception, not the rule. So after that first 2-week period, after which you had the half cast removed and the stitches taken out, you then have generally, I think it is a 4-week period in the full cast, and over this time it's getting used to using your crutches and all the other systems that I spoke of that you need to have in place as to just how you're going to live your life and manage things over that month. The real critical thing that I found is they tell you that it's very important to keep your leg up as much as possible, so that you don't get the edema, the puffing up of the ankle area, and absolutely for there to be no weight placement on the ankle at all. And I'm certainly satisfied and believe that the degree to which you can do this is going to play a very large part in the success of your operation. The other things, and you would be told this by your surgeon beforehand, how well you cope after the operation and the fusion itself, how well that takes place, is dependent on a lot of things, particularly about your general health. It's certainly known that if you're a smoker, it's likely to produce some complications, conditions like diabetes, overweight or obesity. They will all have a bearing on how things go, and so it's best that before the operation that you get yourself in the best possible shape that you're able, and this will certainly be a benefit for you in the recovery. What I'd like to do now is show you a few of the essential aids. The crutches, of course, are something that you'll be provided with through the hospital, but other things, as I mentioned before, like especially a chair in the bathroom, and also the boot, and I'll show you those things in a moment, that do make life a lot easier and help you putting together a system as to how you're going to do things over the period where your movement is fairly restricted. Right, so what we have here is the Well, in this case, this one's a toilet chair, or it can be a bench seat. I've got it at the angle there so you can see what it's like. I actually snapped this one up at a second-hand yard, but it only had 3 legs, so what I had to do, you might just see over there, I had to make a 3rd leg for it, which I was able to do, and then get a new set of feet, and it worked just fine for the cost of a couple of dollars. They're a good bit more than that if you have to buy them new. Happily, I didn't have to use this as a toilet seat, so I was just putting a cover over it, and it worked really well over those first 6 weeks in the bathroom. What you do is kneel on it with the crook leg, and then you're able to have both the handles to move that round in the bathroom and take you up to the shower recess and angle it so that you can back onto the seat here in the shower bath, and then swing your legs over the shower bath and take it all from there. Okay, now let's consider how things are after the first, well, the 6 weeks. That's the 2 plus the 4, and you're now onto the second visit with your surgeon. He will have given you a form for an X-ray to have a day or so before you see him, and this will indicate, and he will discuss with you, just how well he thinks the fusion is going. I don't know whether it's just me, but I think it's probably reasonable that there's a fair bit of anticipation about this, because it's a fairly big point in the whole process to see just how well things are fusing. And I was very pleased when the X-rays went up and we had a close look that it was said that mine seemed to be taking fairly well. Not only fairly well, actually very well, it was said. I thought this was just probably looking at the joints where the 3 bones were coming together, but it also takes into account the lands and the grooves, that's the high and the low points along the screws, because apparently if there's any furry indications on the X-ray, this can indicate that there may be some issues with movement around those screws, and this would impact on the general fusion. I'm pleased to say that also showed up fairly well on my X-ray, and so it was that I was told what would be happening over the next 6 weeks. The plan for that time was that we could look at some rehabilitation at the hospital, and that's outpatient rehabilitation, and also at home in the moon boot. And so if you'd had a cast put on, the cast would be removed and replaced with a moon boot. And over the next 6 weeks it was moving from standing and getting used to balancing on both feet with the minimal of pressure, and then going from very minor weight bearing, 10%, 25%, and over that 6-week period up to, but not exceeding, 50% weight bearing. Now, how do you work that out? Well, what you do is get the bathroom scale and use that to working out on your weight and putting pressure on the scale, and it will show you that 10%, 25% or a quarter, and then up to the halfway level of your weight, which will indicate to you the sort of weight bearing that you will progress through. This is important that you have these relative figures, and when you are doing this on the scale, you'll get the feel for what each of those milestones is in terms of the feeling in your leg, and you generally start to get a pretty good understanding of what you can and can't do. I mean, what you're looking for over this very important next 6 weeks to consolidate, hopefully, on the good indications that you've been given, is to ensure that everything progresses well and that you avoid and get a good understanding of the pain levels that are reasonable. It's also a very good idea to have good periods where you have your leg elevated, particularly if you do get any edema or swelling around the ankle, and generally you've got to take things very, very slowly. I think at times there's probably the feeling that you maybe want to get moving, and for those who have to return to work or be more active or don't have the sort of terrific care that I get from my wife, you might find that you're having to do more than possibly is in the best interests of helping the fusion of your ankle. And I suppose everybody's journey is a bit different in this respect. Just one other little idea that might prove handy. Because the handles on my crutches were specific to left and right, what I did is put the little yellow dot that you see there, and this indicated that that was the left-hand crutch, and it just made it a little easier when you were picking them up to flick the right crutch into the right hand. And over the course of time, that's a pretty handy thing. Now is just demonstrate the partial weight bearing on the crutches, so I'll walk over here and sort of show you from a side view. Right, starting off at, but essentially you're wanting to put the crutches and the affected foot moving together, so it's, there we go. And what you'll find is that you'll get a feel for how much weight you're putting on your foot, and you can actually calibrate this, as I mentioned before, by checking it on the bathroom scales. What I'll do now is show you my moon boot that we've had on. This is this is a long one. I've also got one that goes a little bit shorter than that, and you can get them quite a bit shorter. I spent a lot of time looking at them online, and there's a lot of variations in crutches and with blow-up pads inside and all that type of thing, but I found this to be quite secure and certainly giving plenty of support to the ankle. You've got to get used to all these Velcro pads and so on, and whipping it off like that, and then the foot out like so. I'll wear a sock, and we'll come in a bit closer and have a look at what we've got on here. Now, this was my original wound from 30 years ago when I smashed up in a pretty bad parachuting accident. But to have the fusion, the surgeon did discuss the idea of whether he would go in closer to this, but in the end determined that no, he would go inside. So this is the very, very short cut that you see there, and then on the other side, this is the longer one up here. And it's a beautiful sort of repair job. There's a lot of sort of skin, as you expect, skin flakes and so on. And of course that's a lot worse when you come out of the plaster, the full plaster that's been on for a month. But I had a big bump going here as well. All of that's been shaved off and cleaned up, but I'm very happy with that. What I'd like to do is just show you a little bit about the water repellent sleeve, and I mentioned before the foam neck that it has here. Now, after your first 2 weeks you had the half cast, and then if you go into a full cast, well then this sleeve will fit, the collar of this will fit over generally most of the cast. In my case, because I had a moon boot, that wasn't going to happen, and so what I did is I cut the bottom of the moon boot, just of the cast, of the sleeve, just straight along like that, and then so before the shower I put that on there like that, and then pulled it all the way up, put my moon boot on and got ready for the shower, then pulled it all down over the moon boot, and then just made a folding over like that, and turning it up, and then just had the magical little clip, put it on like that, and so then I could get into the shower, and I found that that worked really, really well. So there we have the first instalment of my trying to provide some information on an ankle fusion or arthrodesis. This video takes us up to the just over the 6-week mark, and I've tried to cover a full range of elements, not everything, that I've found over the time, and things that I think might be a little helpful. I'm now heading towards another 6 weeks where I'm going from very partial up to 50% weight bearing, and then there'll be another segment after that, probably a month or another 6 weeks, when you move from 50 to full weight bearing. So I'll leave that for now and come back with a separate video at a later time.